Good morning. The February 16th, 2022 meeting of the Board of Estimates is now called to order. In the interest of promoting health and safety as we continue to deal with COVID-19 pandemic, the board continues to meet virtually. At this time, I will ask Comptroller Henry for any corrections, additions, or noted abstentions to today's agenda. Comptroller Henry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the following changes and corrections. On page 3, BSIT consultant agreement under the MBE-WBE participation for the MBE, please delete 27% and insert 7%. The following protests have been received by the board. On page 140, item number 2, Bureau of Procurement, B50006120, expanding and creating tree pits. A protest was received from Sparks Quality Fence Company. On page 141, item number 3, Bureau of Procurement, B50006282, fiber optic cable installation, maintenance, and repair services. Protests were received from Blue Star Technologies Incorporated and Highlander Contracting Company. On pages 141 and 142, items number 4 and 5, WC 1252, Grantley Road and vicinity water main replacement. Protest was received from Metra Industries and a supplemental protest was received from Metra Industries. On pages 143 to 144, items number 8 and 9, WC 1410, urgent need water infrastructure, rehabilitation and improvements, phase 1 FY21. Protests were received from RE Harrington Plumbing and Heating Company Incorporated and Metra Industries. A supplemental protest was also received from Metra Industries. The following items are being deferred. Pages 141 to 142, items number 4 and number 5, WC 1252, Grantley Road and vicinity water main replacement, being deferred until March 2nd at the request of the city administrator. Pages 143 to 144, items number 8 and 9, WC 1410, urgent need water infrastructure, rehabilitation and improvements, phase 1 FY21. This item is being deferred until March 2nd, 2022 at the request of the city administrator. Page 146, master services agreement. This item is being deferred for the second time to March 2nd at the request of the president. The following items are being moved to the non-routine agenda. On page 28, Law Department Settlement Agreement and Release. On pages 29 and 30, Law Department Settlement Agreement and Release. On page 33, Department of Audits Audit Report. Page 100, Bureau of Procurement Unauthorized Spend, Pay Outstanding Invoices. On page 140, item number 2, Bureau of Procurement B50006120, expanding and creating tree pits. Page 141, item number 3, Bureau of Procurement B50006282, fiber optic cable installation, maintenance, and repair services. We have no items being moved to the routine agenda. The board has received the following abstentions from the Honorable Mayor Brandon Scott on page 15, item number 7, Health Department Agreement with the Johns Hopkins University School of Nursing. On page 16, item number 11, Health Department Agreement with the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. The Honorable President Nick Mosby, page 20, State's Attorney's Office Grant Award. Page 21, State's Attorney's Office Grant Award, no cost extension. There are no other abstentions, no votes, and no rejection of recommended awards. Thank you, Mr. President.
No, thank you, Mr. Comptroller. As discussed at the top of the meeting, there's a new set of policies and procedures to ensure that there's some structure or additional structure with the Board of Estimates. Those new policies and procedures was voted on by this board, enacted by this board, and was somewhat spearheaded from our Comptroller. So with that, at this time, based off the newly enacted Board of Estimates rules and regulations, I'll ask for a motion to approve the opening statement as was read by our Comptroller.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and probably seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 And those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The opening statement is now adopted. I now direct the board's attention to a memorandum from my office dated February the 14th, 2022, identifying matters to be considered as routine agenda items, together with any corrections and additions and abstentions and no votes that have been noted by our amazing comptroller. I'll entertain a motion to approve all the items contained on the routine agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The routine agenda has been adopted. On to our first item on the non-routine agenda. It can be found on page 28, Department of Law Settlement Agreement and Release. This is a settlement in the amount of $53,000 with Christian Austin. Mr. Austin is a minor plaintiff whose hand was slammed into a door by a staff member while attending a summer program at Collington Square Recreational Center. On behalf of the Law Department, we have Stephen Salisbury to walk us through the settlement. Mr. Salisbury, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. President. Actually, Ebony Thompson, Deputy Solicitor, will actually be stepping in today.
Uh-oh, we get
Good to
the
see
first
you.
sighting of our new Deputy Solicitor. Please give a huge round of applause for Ms. Ebony Thompson, who's sorry, folks. Miss Deputy Solicitor Thompson, you've come with sparks already. Charm City TV just went out as soon as you began to speak. We're looking to try to pull that back up. So if we could just hold on for 1 second, please.
Yes, sir.
Mr. President, I think we're good.
It's back up.
We're back up.
All right, cool. So now I get to do the introduction. So to our amazing new Deputy Solicitor, Ms. Ebony Thompson, comes with a wealth of experience in the legal community, as well as a native Baltimorean. I think I only have one issue with Ebony Thompson, but we won't get into why Polly is so amazing today. With that said, I will turn it over to you, Deputy Solicitor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Board. Good morning to you all. This first settlement is a result of an incident that happened on July 27th, 2015. At the time, the minor Christian Austin was only 6 years old. He was attending a summer program at one of our rec centers. At the time, the defendant, one of our staff workers, Ms. Horsey, directed two of the boys, one including Christian Austin, to go into the other room. By accident, she slammed his hand in the door, thinking that he had already passed. It was an accident, and that is consistent testimony from not only Christian Austin, but also is consistent with the staff member there as well. However, it was negligence. Because he was 6 years old, the tip of his finger was actually partially amputated, and the pictures were pretty grotesque. It was extremely painful. But thank goodness Johns Hopkins was able to repair his hand. It looks remarkably different. However, he still has some limitation there and some scarring. He has incurred close to about $12,000 in medical expenses. And we feel this is a strong settlement, as if this were to go to trial and they would reveal those pictures, we believe that $53,000 would be a very, very good offer and settlement for our case. So for these reasons, we're asking that the board approve the settlement for $53,000, and available to take any questions.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Solicitor. At this point, are there any questions from board members for the Law Department? Hearing and seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is approved. The next item on the non-routine agenda can be found on pages 29 through 30, Department of Law Settlement Agreement and Release. This is a settlement in the amount of $160,000 with now former officer Jeffrey Taylor. The underlying lawsuit alleges claims of retaliation for exercising his First Amendment rights in relation to an OIG investigation into BPD's Marine unit. On behalf of the Law Department, we again are going to hear from Madam Deputy Solicitor Thompson. At this floor, Madam Deputy Solicitor Thompson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. And again, thank you, Board. This settlement is for a federal lawsuit that was initiated, as Mr. President stated, now former Officer Jeffrey Taylor, for the removal of a boat from the Inner Harbor by the BPD Marine Unit, roughly in February of 2017. Back in December of 2016, plaintiff was a member of the Marine Unit, and he informed his chain of command, including his direct supervisor, Sergeant Rupke, and also commander of the Special Operations Unit, Major Milton Corbett, that he believed the operation was a little out of the scope and the capabilities of the Marine Unit. Nevertheless, the Marine Unit went ahead and continued the operation and removed the boat in early 2017, February 2017. Now plaintiff alleged that he was retaliated against for exercising his First Amendment rights, for initiating a internal affairs report complaint, as well as going to the Inspector General and following a report where he took his complaints outside of the chain of command, and he said that he was being retaliated against for exercising his First Amendment rights, but the IG actually found that the removal of the boat was unsafe and wasted city funds to the tune of approximately $30,000. However, both the Internal Affairs and the Inspector General found that there was no retaliation. After that IG report was initiated, he then filed this suit claiming his First Amendment rights were infringed upon. And we find that the $160,000 is a strong settlement for two reasons. The first is that while there was no retaliation that was found, because there was the IG report that there was, the removal was unsafe and a waste of city funds, if the fact finder were to determine that his First Amendment rights were infringed upon in any way and results in even nominal damages, even to the tune of $1, this would trigger the Section 1988 fee provisions. And because this incident happened all the way back in December of 2016, plaintiff has now accumulated in excess of $400,000 in legal fees. And of course, that would be tremendously more if we took this to trial. So while we are confident in terms of the reports that never showed retaliation, the risk of us having that fee provision, if the fact finder were to find that, is great, and this minimizes our risk. The second are because the drafting and the crafting of the settlement agreement and the provisions there. First, there is a waiver of all claims that could have been brought or that were brought. And plaintiff has alleged not only the First Amendment retaliation claims, but also hostile work environment, emotional distress, stating that he had to see a therapist because of the incident. And this would insulate us from those future claims. And the second part is the confidentiality provision, which it doesn't just go to the terms of this actual suit, but it extends to all documents that were exchanged during discovery. So for these reasons, we feel that $160,000 would be a strong settlement, and we move for the board to approve this. Thank you, Mr. President.
No, thank you, Madam Deputy Solicitor. Not really a question, just more of a comment. And we see this occasionally, and they kind of always fall back to back, but we just voted on an item where a little boy in East Baltimore hand was slammed in a door to the tune that it was grotesque. And it took doctors and surgeons to literally get it back to any level of normalization, and the likelihood that this little boy will have some level of disability for the rest of his life associated with his hand is pretty evident. And that settlement's for $53,000. Now we have this settlement where someone is claiming that their First Amendment rights were violated through internal investigations of internal affairs, as well as from the Office of Inspector General, it's determined that his rights weren't violated. So he initiated a process. That process was carried out and was determined that there was no violation internally. And he's getting basically 3 times the amount that the little boy is getting in the settlement. I don't know when we talk about equity and settlements and kind of how that looks. And I know from a legal perspective, you guys have to ultimately weigh the risk versus the reward. Just wondering, and this is not to be answered now, but just wondering, like, when do we decide to fight something like this, as opposed to, handing over $160,000? And how does that look as it relates to some of the other settlements that we've seen with maybe clientele that's from a different socioeconomic status, or maybe do not have access to certain lawyers? How you guys have to run this in the best interest of the city as it relates to saving as much money of the city as possible. I do consistently see an equity issue associated with the way that we handle these settlements. So again, to the solicitor, to the deputy solicitor, I just would like to you just to take that back and think about that and kind of look at how we come up with these settlement amounts, because it does seem to be sometimes a pattern depending on wherever the plaintiff kind of lands and presents their case to us. So,
Mr. President,
yes, sir.
I completely agree with you. And we will certainly take a look at it specifically and generally. I would note that these attorney's fees provisions in some statutes create an imbalance that legislators ought to think about before they routinely insert fee shifting provisions.
Yes, the defense bar is pretty strong in Annapolis, but willing to work with you, Mr. Solicitor, if there's anything that you could point out for me to kind of help support that. So
Will do.
thank you for that. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns from members of this board? Hearing and seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and probably seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is approved. The next item on the routine agenda can be found on page 33, Department of Audits, Audit Report. The board is requested to note receipt of an agreed upon procedures of SCHET funds for fiscal years ending June 30 through 2020 and June 30th, 2019, as well as June 30th, 2018. At this time, I'll turn the floor over to our amazing auditor, Mr. Josh Pash, to introduce his team and walk us through his audit findings. Mr. Auditor, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. President, Mr. Comptroller, board members. My name is Josh Pash, I'm the city auditor, and I am here to present the independent audit report applying agreed upon procedures for sheet funds for fiscal years 2020, 2019, and 2018. Can you confirm that you see my PowerPoint presentation? Okay.
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay. So I will start off with, I'm going to go ahead and kind of explain the difference between agreed upon procedure and an audit, and then we'll go over the objectives and scope, the results, and then the causes and recommendations. Okay, so there is a difference between the assurance provided for an audit and an agreed upon procedure. So we provide reasonable assurance for an audit, and that is over the process or over the function. There is no assurance provided over the processes or the functions in an agreed upon procedure. So how that works out is the work that we perform is that for an audit, we identify the relevant risks to those audit objectives, and we determine materiality thresholds. Agreed upon procedures, basically, we, along with the person that we're agreeing upon the procedures with, come up with certain steps and certain different procedures we're going to apply specifically for those steps. The conclusion for an audit is we make a conclusion on the subject matter. For an agreed upon procedures, all we're doing is we are identifying the findings that we have noted in those procedures. So for an audit, we provide opinion, whether the financial statements are materially misstated, or if there's a modified opinion. There's no opinion on agreed on procedures. We just basically say this step passed, this step didn't pass. And so for the report, we'll usually say, in our opinion, the financial statements are fairly stated, materially fairly stated. We don't put that into an agreed upon procedure, and then it's for limited use only because it is just identifying those specific procedures. So the objectives was to evaluate whether we are in compliance with the escheat funds, the state escheat funds, and then to identify whether there's documented policies and procedures to track, potential escheat funds, and then to make sure that we're complying with state reporting and remittance requirements. So these are the agreed upon procedures, or the steps we performed, and the results are the results that we found. So the first step was we verified that the Department of Finance controls all escheat funds through separate accounts that are subject to a high level of internal control. Basically, the state requirement is that you can't commingle your tracking of escheat funds. We did note an exception that not all of the escheat funds they're not kept in a separate general ledger account, that there was other transactions in that account. The second step was to look at the current controls and see that they all have supervisor review and approval. We noted an exception there that neither Bureau of Revenue Collection nor BAPS could evidence that all the transactions that were going into and out of the escheat account had supervisor review and approval. The auditor, note here is we couldn't say that they were not reviewed and approved. All we could find is that there was no evidence that they were there. And then, of course, we're looking back for 3 years. So the third step was verifying that the city's current processes require that we are capturing and retaining sufficient data to basically look up who these escheated funds are from. Escheated fund basically is when the city makes a payment and that payment the check is not cashed. And so basically we have it's an outstanding check and the money's not ours. It belongs to whoever we're giving it to, but we can't find them to give it to them. So the state policy requirements are that, we have data such as the name, the last name, address, the transaction payment was due, if there's an identifying number like the check number, any basically sufficient stuff to kind of look for who we owe the money to. We didn't find any exceptions here, that all the information was being retained and kept by finance. The fourth step we did was the state requires that there's a follow-up on outstanding checks after 6 months or less, basically by sending due diligence letters, sending out letters to say, hey, we owe you money and can you come get it? We did note an exception here from the Treasury Department, BAPS, and BRC. There is no policy requirement that they follow up on the outstanding checks at the 6-month mark or more frequently. And we also noted that BAPS was not sending or did not send these due diligence letters, which are required. We noted in fiscal year 2020 that any of the payroll escheated funds, so that's a payroll check or payment, there was no follow-up on that. And then fiscal years 2018 to 20, we sampled 30 and we noted that 23 did not have, there was no evidence of having those due diligence letters being sent. Step 5, we verify the state policy is that department maintains all records for 8 years. Neither BAPS or BRC could provide a record retention policy and documentation to support 8 years, which is that state statute of limitations. Sixth step, we looked at the filing of those annual escheat fund reports. Basically, if we can't find the owner of the funds, then we're supposed to remit that money to the state and then they collect it and keep it. And that's an annual report and it's supposed to be filed even if there are no escheat funds for that year. We did notice an exception there that the Department of Finance did not timely file the payroll annual escheat fund reports for fiscal year ended June 30th, 2020. And then I'm going to skip down to number 8. That's directly related to that. Verify the penalty payment to the Comptroller State of Maryland for failure to follow the rules. There was no penalty, no exception noted. And we noted and we found that even though that we did not file timely, the state of Maryland did not charge us any interest or penalties. Number 7, verify all checks and wire transfers for sheet funds were made payable to the Comptroller of State of Maryland. This is basically just that transfer of funds. No exception noted. That was fine. Okay, so we dove into causes and recommendations. The primary cause is there's not a set policies and procedures, set of rules that kind of define how we're supposed to be doing this and, have point people, et cetera. So our recommendations are basically to set up policies and procedures that are compliant with the state rules. And then that would be having a separate general ledger account so that if we pull up this account and we look inside of it, we know everything in there is sheet funds. It's helps tracking to allocate authority and responsibility so that the employees know, who's supposed to be doing what role and how to make sure that we're keeping these assets and the records safe and accurate. And then to implement the following up of outstanding checks for the 6-month mark or more frequently, and then to send out those diligence letters. Maintain a record for all sheet funds for 8 years. So basically, we're maintaining the records, we're just not maintaining it for the required amount of time. And then to basically create a procedures that say, when are we going to adjust these sheet funds? Does the Department of Finance want to do a monthly, quarterly review that goes over this stuff so that those positive procedures can create the framework for making the process compliant? Okay. And that ends my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Auditor. At this point, are there any questions or concerns for Mr. Auditor or his staff regarding this report? Thank you, Mr. Auditor. I do. Okay, I'm sorry. Sorry, you weren't up on my screen yet. Ms. Comptroller, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I'm not sure if this is technically a question for the city auditor or if this would technically be a question for finance. But on page 7, finance committed to developing a workflow and timeline for steps in the achievement process by January 15th of this year. And so I just wanted to check back and find if they have shared that with the city auditor's office, and if not, can they share what they've developed with the board?
I don't have a current status on any of these findings. I do know that they were, I do know that once we gave them the finding for the report, they did start separating the general ledger account. But I'm not aware of any of the other status.
Yeah, and we have Director of Finance, Mr. Henry Raymond also. Director Raymond, if you could address the Comptroller's question.
Yeah, good morning, President Mosby, Mayor Scott, Controller Henry, honorable board members. I'm Henry Raymond, Director of Finance. First, the Department of Finance concurs with the recommendation and has begun the steps to implement the recommendations. All of the recommendations will be implemented by July 1st of 22 as it coincides with the beginning of the new fiscal year. Specifically in reference to the Comptroller's inquiry, we have developed the workflow and timeline, and we can provide that to the audit department. That was not a requirement to provide that. The requirement is to have this implemented by July the 1st of 22, but we will provide that document.
That would be appreciated. Thank you.
Yep, you're very welcome.
At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns for Mr. Auditor or Mr. Director from Finance? Hearing and seeing none, there's no further action needed. And without any questions, this audit report will be noted in today's record. So thank you, Mr. Auditor, and thank you, Mr. Finance Director Henry Raymond. The next item on the non-routine agenda can be found on page 100 for outstanding invoices on contract B5000482213, interior renovation and associated trades with First Potomac Environmental Group in the amount of $30,293 for the purchase of environmental cleaning services. On behalf of General Services, we have Chief Fiscal Officer Ben Brosh. Mr. Brosh, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Good morning to honorable board members, Council President Mosby, Mayor Scott, Comptroller Henry. My name is Ben Brosh, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the Department of General Services. We have an item on the agenda regarding unauthorized spend with a vendor that the city previously had on contract for interior renovation, carpentry, and associated trades. That contract extended through February 2021. The agenda item identified that there was an option term associated with this contract, but that option was not approved or extended. As an agency, DGS is tasked with the responsibility to answer a large number of urgent service requests and to ensure the health and safety of our customer agencies and stewardship of their assets. We do have a duty to respond quickly in those instances. I would also acknowledge that despite that requirement, we do not want to use those urgent requests as the start point to begin, kind of thinking through a procurement process. Our requisitioning and approval processes for individual tasks may require at least several days to get through that start to finish point at best. And if a customer is experiencing a more urgent issue, I would not want to, I want to make sure that their needs are met and that we have alignment between that procurement process and the service request. With that in mind, we are looking for ways to better align procurement with service provision. We've been working with the Bureau of Procurement to ensure that we have releases established to better facilitate payment for services later for those services rendered during the contract term. Additionally, I would just note that kind of longer term, we have established a requisition for services for interior renovation, carpentry, and other associated applicable trades. That requisition does include specifications to help inform the bid solicitation, and we'll be working with the Bureau of Procurement to ensure that we have a bid process for those services so that we can have that longer term contract mechanism in place to be able to ensure that we have continuity of service provision.
Thank you, Mr. Brosh. Not a question, but just a comment to procurement. Ms. Brown, if you could, when we get out of this, provide me, I guess, like the timeline we expect to get the existing contract, through. And then if there's any other additional contracts that we need to kind of get through from procurement, particularly as it relates to DGS, any issues or timelines associated with them as well. At this point, are there any questions or concerns for Mr. Chief Financial Officer? I see the hand raised of Comptroller. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. I first just want to, actually, both of these are just clarifications. Does DGS anticipate any more invoices under this contract?
Under this contract, I don't believe so, but we will continue to check. We have been attempting, not just through this contract, but through other contracts where we have outstanding invoices, to be able to group them as best possible, to be presenting them to the board in one instance so that we do not have to come to the board in multiple instances for the same contract. So I can certainly follow up just to make sure on that.
Okay, that would be appreciated as well. And second, I'm not sure if this is what you were saying at the end or not, but do you currently have a valid contract in place for these services with anyone?
Not a long-term contract. So the prior contract did have several vendors on the POs. That contract term, the option term, I believe, extended through February 4th, 2022. So I think for the time being, we will need to rely on some more kind of short-term open market mechanisms to be able to kind of solicit for individual jobs. I wouldn't look at that as something that we would want to continue long-term. We definitely need to have a more formal bid process in place to assist.
Okay, and then this one is for Ms. Brown. Is there a solicitation on the street for this contract, or can you tell us when you're projecting you'll have one to advertise?
Good morning, Honorable Board, and thank you for having me have the opportunity to speak to the solicitation. To your point or your question, Comptroller Henry, I would have to check and see if this solicitation has actually been placed on the street and may be under evaluation. But if you allow me to speak to the history of the contract, I'll be happy to do that. So we were not ill prepared for the services under this contract. What happened on the board action on May, it was May 19, 2021, we respectfully brought this contract before the board to exercise the last renewal. And as we discussed, the solicitations are on project schedule and they kind of run concurrent with renewals to determine how much time we have to collaborate with the agency and to provide a new solicitation to replace old solicitations and make those awards. Unfortunately, on the date of May 19, 2021, we were in transition from the previous administration into your office, and this particular item was heavily scrutinized because of MBE-WBE noncompliance. I respect that, and we have been doing a lot better in the compliance field led by Chief Lundy, but in this particular case, this was one of those newer contracts that were subjected to those type of scrutiny, and the board did not approve renewal because of the non-compliance.
I appreciate that backstory. Thank you.
So Ms. Brown, if you could just copy Comptroller on the same email for the information I requested, I think that will be sufficient for, I think, his line of
Yes,
questioning.
sir. Will do.
At this point, are there any questions or concerns from other members of the board? Hearing and seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I move approval.
Second.
Been moved and probably seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is approved. The next item on the non-routine agenda can be found on page 141, item number 2, Bureau of Procurement, expanding the creating of tree pits. A protest was received from Sparks Quality Fence Company. The recommendation of the procurement is to reject all of the received bids and resolicit this contract. Per city procurement regulations, a recommendation to reject all bids is not subject to protest. In the interest of fairness and public transparency, I want to take this opportunity to explain the rule and ask that the Bureau of Procurement very briefly explain their recommendation and next steps on behalf of Bureau of Procurement. We have acting procurement. No, we have Chief Keisha Brown. Ms. Brown, the floor is yours.
Yes, sir. Thank you again, President Mosby, and good morning again, honorable members of the board. B5000-6120, expanding and creating tree pits. This advertisement was opened and evaluated, and there were 2 offers or bidders who responded to the solicitation. As a result of the solicitation, one supply offer was found non-compliant, and the second offer exceeded the budget of the agency's forecasted budget for the project. The MBE goals were set at 11% and the WBE goals were set at 3%. After evaluating with the delta of the next lowest bidder being responsive and responsible, their delta was $321,000, meaning it was $321,000 more than the lowest responsive bidder. Being good stewards of funds being spent for the city, we consulted with the agency and we determined that we would request that the board reject all bids and allow us an opportunity to rebid this solicitation.
Thank you, Chief Brown, for that explanation in the background. At this time, I recognize Mr. Charles Sparks, President of Sparks Quality Fence Company. As I stated earlier, this item is not subject to protest. However, what we've done in the past, in the interest of transparency, if there's any additional items that you would like to raise to the board's attention, I ask that you very briefly do so. He's not on, it appears, or anyone representing him. So at this point, are there any additional questions from members of the board? Seeing no further questions or concerns or any unreadiness, at this point, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and probably seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is approved. The next item on the on-reaching agenda can be found on page 141, number 3, Bureau Procurement, Fiber Optic Cable Installation, Maintenance, and Repair Services. The recommendation here is to, again, reject all received bids and to clarify and resolicit this award. Protests were received last month by Blue Star Technologies Incorporated and Highlander Contracting Company. At this time, there was a recommended awardee. After additional evaluation, the recommendation is now to reject all bids. As noted on the previous item, a recommendation to reject all bids is not subject to protest. On behalf of Bureau Procurement, I'll again ask Chief Brown to walk us through this item. Chief Brown, the floor is yours.
Yes, sir. Good morning again. We took the protest very seriously. On the Board Estimates 11922 agenda, you'll find this item where the Bureau Procurement initially recommended an award. After receiving the protests, which we do review those protests and go back and look at some of the concerns that the contractors are presenting to us in the solicitation. So we did that in collaboration with the Minority Women Business Law and the agency, lead agency, which was BSIT Technology. So on that, at that time, we reviewed the protest and the awardee and found that there were some concerns in terms of the scope and specification, and also forecasted projects that were coming that the agency felt that they may want additional awardees. So we received 5 bids, 2 of which had some concerns in terms of the meeting the prevailing wage for these their line item bid for overtime, in addition to some other questions as far as the compliance review. So we continue to evaluate, and at that time on 1/21/22, the Bureau of Procurement respectfully presented to the Comptroller's Office to withdraw the recommendation for award. And at which time we're coming before you today to ask to reject all bids and allow for the Bureau of Procurement to work in tandem with the agency to address the scope and the upcoming capacity, to transparently include that in the background of what the needs are of the city, so we can appropriately potentially have multiple awards to fulfill the capacity and volume of work that is forthcoming.
Thank you, Thank you for your leadership on this item, Chief Brown. Just like we've done in the past, again, this is not subject to protest, but obviously a protest provided the plight for where we are for this particular rejection. Again, showing that government is looking to work for all as it relates to our process and our procedures. So again, Chief Brown, thank you for your leadership on this particular item. At this time, I would like to recognize any representatives from Blue Star Technologies Incorporated to speak on any aspects of this protest that are still ripe for the board's consideration in light of recommendation from procurement to resolicit this award. At this time, is there any representatives from Blue Star who would like to speak on behalf of this? Hearing and seeing none, I'll give Highlander Contracting Company the same opportunity. Hearing and seeing none, we're going to move forward to entertain a motion. So at this point, I'll entertain a motion to.
I move approval of the rejection.
It's a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and probably seconded for us to move forward with this rejection. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is rejected. And back to procurement. Before we close out, I think these past 2 items, as well as the beginning of this meeting, show that this board takes very serious one, developing processes and procedures to ensure that we're governing ourselves in the most transparent way. And we are actively working to show good government to the public through these Board of Estimates meetings. I think with these past two items, one was a lot of pushback very early on from this board regarding some MWBE goal attainment and the way that some past business was done that the administration took and said, hey, let's pull this back and let's figure out and go back to the drawing board. Obviously, we have to work out the procurement timeline. That's why we needed to do that emergency $30,000 job today, but that is us moving in the right direction. And then this last one where someone was able to point out some deficiencies or some problems through the protest procedure. Again, the administration through Chief Brown was able to say, hey, maybe this is something that we should reject, pull back, go back to the drawing board. I think this is good government. I think that this is what this board has kind of stood for since the new administrations have taken over. And I think that this is exactly what folks demand, but more importantly, deserve as it relates from this Board of Estimates. So with that said, thank you to all the members for all your hard work for more than a year and us really drilling down and providing good government through the Board of Estimates. With that said, before we adjourn, are there any questions, concerns, or items that members would like to raise? Hearing and seeing none, as there's no new business before the desk, this board will recess until bid opening at 12 noon. As a reminder, the Board of Estimates has adopted a bi-weekly. I'm sorry, Mr. Comptroller.
Yeah, we're just a reminder, Mr. President, this is the week that we're shifting to the electronic bid openings.
Okay.
So the board won't be reconvening at noon physically anymore. We'll be opening the bids and posting them electronically on our website later today.
Mr. Comptroller, if you could take 60 seconds and explain that to the public, what you just talked about regarding the electronic process.
Sure. So what we're going to be doing is rather than having the members of the Board of Estimates gathering together in the Board of Estimates chambers while members of the Comptroller's staff physically open the bids and then have members of the board verify in person in front of the cameras that they are reading the amount of the bids, and then having that information put into tab sheets, which is sent to purchasing. What we're going to do is have the staff open the bids. The clerk of the Board of Estimates, Celeste Amato, in my office, will verify each actual bid price as it's then entered into the tab sheets. And then we will take the tab sheets and not only send them to purchasing, but we will also be posting them on the Comptroller's website so that any interested bidder or vendor can see everybody's bids already printed out in a form online rather than have to sit there and write down notes because they're watching us or, God help us, calling in on the phone to listen to us reading the bids out loud.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller, for the explanation. As a reminder, the Board of Estimates has adopted a bi-weekly meeting schedule for 2022 and will reconvene on Wednesday, March the 2nd at 9 a.m. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. Baltimore, please stay safe, and we absolutely love you.